I think we can all agree that page transitions are the hallmark of creative websites. And so I took my time to cook a really nice video for you guys. I basically took 3 awards-winning websites, looked at their page transitions, and I remade them using Next.js and Framer Motion. And as of today, it's kind of sad. There's no way of creating page transitions using the app router. And so I've remade all of these transitions using the page router. But the good news is the page router is really fine for small and experimental websites that require things like page transitions. And I think that's why we see agencies like Studio Fright use the page router to make their websites. But anyways, let's get right into it. I've created multiple chapters for you guys so you can choose which page transition you prefer. And if you want to watch the full video, I've ordered them from easiest to hardest. All right, so the way I do my page transition in Next.js 14 inside of the page router is by using the Animate Presence by Framer Motion. Basically, what you want to do is inside of the app.js, you want to wrap your components inside of an Animate Presence, and then you want to use the mode wait. And that way, if we look at the description here, it's going to wait for the exiting components to animate out before animating in the next component. And also, you want to add a key to the component here because Animate Presence need to be able to differentiate the different components, which are your pages. And so what I usually do is grab the router from the props, and then I have access to the route, and I can use that as a unique key. And that's the app that I have right now, a basic setup, 3 different pages. I have a header inside of the app.js, so it gets persisted across all of the different pages. And I have in my pages about, contact, and the index, and just 2 paragraphs. Perfect to start this tutorial. And now the first transition that I want to take a look at is a portfolio by Tkachev. I hope I'm not butchering that name, but it's a really nice website. And if I change page, you're going to see that it's a really, really sweet animation. I really like the scale down and the translate on the y-axis. I think it looks really, really nice, super like polished and clean. And that's going to be the first animation that I want to take a look at today. It's the easiest one out of the 3. And yeah, let's get right into it. And so the first animation that I want to have here is an opacity in. And so I want my content to be invisible at first and then be animated in using an opacity. And one way of doing that would be to go inside every single page, add a motion tag in front of the parent, and add an opacity animation. But we can actually do this much smarter by going inside of an external component that I called layout. And we could go inside, for example, the inner, and we could define the exit and enter animation once inside of it. And then instead of having a page here, what I can have here is instead I'm going to import the inner, and then I'm going to wrap the whole content of my page inside of that component. And here the inner just returns the page. And that way I can define the animation once inside of that inner component, and I can reuse it for all of my pages. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy paste that, go inside of the contact page, just adjust the import, and I can simply wrap my whole page inside of the inner. And I'm going to do the same thing for the about page. And now I can work inside of the inner component and do everything that's related to the entry and exit animation without being linked to the logic and the rest of the layout of a page. And that's a really nice structure. The first thing I'm going to do here for the opacity animation is to import the motion tag from Framer Motion. And I'm going to take that motion tag, put it in front of the page. And then here I'm going to create a template that I'll be able to reuse for all of my animations. And so I'm going to call that the anim, and it's going to be a function that's going to take a variance as a parameter. And that anim function will return an object with a bunch of properties. For example, the initial, I'm going to specify that it should be the initial definition. The animate should be the enter definition, and the exit animation should be the exit definition. And I can specify the variance here. And with that, I can now deconstruct what the anim function returns me. And here I'm going to have the opacity animation that I can define here. And like I said, what I want for the opacity animation is initially, I'm going to have an opacity of 0. On enter, I want to have an opacity of 1. And I'm not going to have an exit animation for now, so I'm just going to leave it at opacity 1 as well. And as you can see, now it's much more clean inside of my JSX. All I have is that animate function, which takes the opacity, and the initial, enter, and exit is defined inside of that anim function here. And now we can see that we have this opacity animation at first, but there is no exit animation for now. It's only an enter animation, so it looks a bit weird. And here I could change the transition and add a duration of like 2 seconds. And here, if I refresh, you're going to see that it takes 2 seconds before appearing. But for now, I'm going to remove that. And now if I look at this, let's see the different kind of animations that he put for his page transition. Okay, so I see that there is a sliding div that comes on exit animation. So I'm going to start doing that. The first thing I'm going to do here is create a parent, and I'm going to put the opacity animation inside of it. And here I can call it the inner, and I can create another div that's going to be used only for that sliding effect. And I can call it the slide. And I'm going to go inside of styling, specify that the inner has a slide. And for the slide, I'm going to put it in position fixed, top 0, left 0. I'm going to put a red background color just so we can see what's going on, of 100 viewport width and height of 100 viewport height. And so now we see the slide taking the full height and full width. And now I can animate it on exit. So let's see, I'm going to create the slide animation. And I'm going to say that initially we shouldn't see it, right? So it should have a top of 100 viewport height. And then on enter, I don't really care because I only want it to be an exit animation. So I'm just going to specify top 100 viewport height, the same value as its initial value. And then the exit animation, what I'm going to do is change the top value to be 0. And then I can reuse my template here using the anim, and I can specify the slide animation. And if I try this, nothing is working. I need to add the motion tag here in front of the div for it to be able to recognize like this definition here. So I'm going to add the motion. I'm going to save that. And as you can see, initially, we don't see it because it's at top 100 viewport height. And I'm going to go to another page. And we can see that we have the sliding. So I'm going to put it back to white so it's not too ugly. And let's see how this looks. So this looks pretty good. There's one thing that's kind of itching my eye. The header is not being animated. As you can see, the content has the opacity animation, but the header doesn't have it. And for this specific animation, it would be best to take the header out of the root and put it in every single page so that it gets animated with the content of the page. It's something that I don't really like doing, but it's going to be necessary for this specific animation for it to match his portfolio, which is really nice. As you can see, the header is being animated out. That means we're going to have to render a header for every single page, which is structurally not really nice, but all we have to do is take it out of the app.js, go inside of the inner here, inside of the page. Now I'm just going to paste the header here. And now you're going to see that it gets animated as well. If I refresh, you see that it gets animated with the opacity. And now with the sliding, this makes a bit more sense. And now the slide comes really fast. What I'm going to do is change the transition on the exit. I'm going to add a duration of 1, and I'm going to add an easing. And for the easing, what I like to do is go on easings.net. And then I want it to be fast and then go slow. So I'm going to take out the ease out cubic. Well, actually, maybe I'm not going to take this one. I'm going to take the ease in out quart. So there's an easing at the beginning and an easing at the end. So I can just grab that definition and put it here. And let's see how it looks. I'm going to change. And now this is a bit more smooth. Actually, I'm going to put it red because we don't see anything. And now you can see that the motion design of this is much better when we start playing with the transition. Oh, and I see something here. The header is on top, which is not good. What I'm going to do is add a Z index of 3 so that it's on top of the header. And now that makes more sense. I'm going to put it back to white. And we should have something like this. All right, so that's done. Let's see what else he did. All right, so there is like a scaling that's happening in the background. It's scaling down and it's sliding up. So I'm going to do this right now. So I'm going to add a div inside here. That's going to wrap the content of the page and the header. And I'm going to move the opacity animation for this one. And now the new parent here is going to have a new animation that I'm going to call perspective. And here I'm going to copy paste the slide and I'm going to do perspective. And now initially, I don't want to do anything for that. It's purely an exit animation. And so I know I want to change the Y. So I'm going to do Y0. And I also know I want to change the scaling. So I'm going to do scale 1. And then on enter, same thing. I don't want to do anything. But now on exit, that's when I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to slide it up by 100. And I'm going to scale it down by 10% with the same transition as the slide. I'm going to save that. And as you can see, we have this perspective animation. It doesn't really look that good. I think what I'm going to do is made it a bit slower. So I'm going to do 1.2 seconds so that the slide actually comes before the perspective animation is done. That's going to have like a little effect. And that looks really cool. And also I believe he has like this black background, which makes everything looks much better. Like for me, everything is white. So we're not really having like sense of perspective because of that. So I'm gonna go into styling and I'm just gonna add a background color black for the inner, and now it's all black. So I'm just gonna do that the page inside of it should have a white background. And let's try this. Now we have a black background, which makes a bit more sense. And now the last thing I want to do is change the opacity of the page while it's leaving. Inside of the index, the perspective here, I'm also going to change the opacity. So at the beginning, I want to have an opacity of 1. On enter, also an opacity of 1. And then on exit, that's what I'm going to change. Now I'm going to reduce it to maybe 0.5. And there you go. That's basically the same animation that he has. Let's try it. Yeah, that looks really, really similar. Of course, his entry animation is like real fancy. He has like a bunch of different animation on a bunch of different elements. My page is like really basic, so it's not exactly the same, but the exit animation is really similar. And now all you would have to do is animate all of your elements inside of your page, depending on your layout. And so that's basically it for the first page transition. And now I want to take a look at the second page transition, which is a page transition by an agency called Tkachev. And it has this nice kind of what I call stairs animation with like columns that are moving up and down. And it's quite easy to do as well. So let's get right into this. The first thing I want to do is, instead of using the inner, I'm going to import the stairs layout. So I'm just going to change that, and I'm going to do the same thing for the contact page and the same thing for the about page here. And also I'll take my header, and instead of having it inside of the page, I'm going to put it back to the root inside of the app.js, because for this animation, we don't need to have our header inside all of the pages. And so now we're back at what we have initially, and we're ready to start making this transition here. So same thing as the inner here, I'm gonna copy paste the motion tag, and then also copy here the anim template so I can actually reuse it. And now the first thing that I see is there is about 5 different columns that needs to be animated. And so I'm gonna have here a const number of columns that's going to be equal to 5. And inside of the page here, I'm going to have a transition container. And inside of it, I'm going to create an array of 5 elements. And then I can map that array. I'm going to have access to an empty element and the index. And from that, I can return a self-enclosing div that I'm going to use as column. And here I need to add a key, or React will complain. And also I'll add here the stairs so that I can style everything. I'm going to go into the styling, the stairs. It has a transition container. I'm going to give it a height of 100 viewport height, width of 100 viewport width, position fixed. And I'm also going to do top 0, left 0. And one important thing is I'm going to do pointer events none so that it's like invisible. And inside of it, it has column. These column will take the full height, the full width, and I'm going to do a background color black. And if I want my div to be evenly distributed, I can simply add a display flex to the parent. And now if I inspect my page, I can see that I have my 5 columns that are overlapping on top of the page. And now all I have to do is animate them. Oh, and here, instead of using 5, I can use number of columns, and then I can change that to have the animation that I want. So let's see what Agence Tkachev did. Initially, it seems like the columns are coming from the top. And after that, they are also leaving from the top. So I'm going to create an animation here. I'm going to call it expand. And initially, I'm going to have the top 0. And that way, all of the columns will overlap the page right at the beginning. And then on enter, I'm going to slide these away. So I'm going to animate the top, and I'm going to slide them by 100%. And here I'll add a transition with a duration of maybe 0.4. And then I'm going to take that expand, and I'm going to add it to every single div with a motion tag in front. And I can have my anim template with the expand variance. I'm going to save that, and we don't have anything. Okay, it's not animating the top value because here I need to specify that my divs are in position relative, and that way I can animate the top value. So let's see, I'm going to refresh this. And now we can see that initially we have the columns and they are all sliding down, but they are all sliding at the same time. I need to find a way to add a delay. So what I can do to pass a delay from the div here to the expand component is inside of the anim template, I'm going to specify a custom value. And so here I can have the custom, and then the anim, I'm going to pass the index as the custom value. And so now the custom value here will be the index of each column. And so now the variance, which is the expand here, will have access to that custom value. And so I can have the index here, and I can specify a delay of maybe 0.05 multiplied by that index. See what we have. And now we have some nice stairs, but they are sliding left to right. And if I look at Tkachev, it's right to left. So to do that, all I have to do here is instead of giving the index, I'm going to reverse it by doing the number of columns minus the index. And now I reverse the order and we have something like this. So that's perfect. If I change the page, you're going to see that I have my enter animation. Now, of course, I don't have an exit animation yet. So let's see what he has for the exit. It's sliding down from the top. And to do that, there's a nice property that's called transition end. And I can actually set properties after the enter animation. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cheat and set the height to 0. And that way on exit animation, I can reset the height back to 100%. And I'm going to take the same transition and here the index. I need to transform this in function. So I'm going to refresh, enter animation, and let's see the exit animation. Okay, something is not working properly. Let's see. Yeah, since I'm changing the top property, I need to reset here the top to 0 as well. And that should work. I'm going to refresh, enter, exit, and enter. Nice. And this is a really sweet animation. So yeah, we're almost done with this animation. There's one last detail that's really important. There's like an overlay, a black overlay that's adding like a nice touch of smoothness to the animation. And as you can see mine, there's just the stairs. There is no like black overlay. So I'm going to do that. It's really easy. I'm going to add a div. I'm going to call that the background. And inside of the styling, I'm going to have the background. It's going to be quite similar to the transition container. I'm going to copy paste that, give it a background color black. And now we shouldn't see anything anymore, but we can adjust that by creating here an overlay animation. Now I'm going to have initially, I'm going to have it be opacity 1. On enter, it's going to be opacity 0.5. And on exit, I'm going to reset the opacity back to 1. Wait, actually no, on enter, the opacity needs to be 0 so we can actually see the content of the page. And initially, yeah, I'm going to leave it at 1 for now. And let's see what we have. I'm going to put the motion tag here, and here I'm going to have my anim template with the overlay animation. And let's see what you have. I'm going to refresh, and now we can see we have an overlay. And here, if I change my page, we have a background. But in my opinion, it's a bit too dark. So I'm just going to reduce that value. Instead of being 1, I'm going to reduce it to 0.5. And now if I try this, this is looking pretty good. It looks quite similar to what we have at K72. I believe their animation is a bit faster, but we can tweak all of that. We could like reduce the duration to 0.3 and we could add like 5 more columns, and let's see what we have with that. And here we have like a completely different effect. That's still like quite sweet. But yeah, for now I'm going to do 5. And yeah, something like that. So that looks pretty cool. That's it for the second page animation. And now let's take a look at the last page transition. It's the final boss. It's the page transition by Denis Snellenberg. His portfolio is just so nice, and his page transition is just insane. It looks so good. There's like the index of the page we're going to. There's a curve SVG. The motion design is super good. That's an incredible page transition. And I want to take a look at how we can make this right now. So the first thing I'm going to do here is import the curve from the layout, and I'm going to replace here the stairs, go inside of the contact, and I'm going to do the same thing, and same thing for the about page. And now we are back with our default state, and I can go inside of the curve and create this page transition. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to import my anim template because it's quite useful, and I'm going to import the motion from Framer Motion. And now if you look at this page transition, the first thing that comes to mind is there's an SVG with a curve. And so what I can do is use the command lines, the SVG commands to create and animate that curve. So what I'm going to do for that is create another component. I'm going to call it SVG, and that SVG is going to return an SVG with a path. And the path is going to have a D attribute, and I'm going to create a custom D attribute. And I'm going to use Illustrator to show you how we're going to do the SVG. Basically, what I want to have is an SVG that goes like this, takes the dimension of the window and covers the full height and the full width of the page. And I also want this top line and this bottom line to be able to curve. And so essentially what I'm going to create is a Bezier curve at the top, and then on the sides it's going to be a straight line, and then I'm going to have another Bezier at the bottom, and then I'm going to have a straight line on the left. And it's going to look something like that. It's going to be more symmetrical than what I just did, but it should be something like this. And so if we want our path to be like this, then we need to have the bounding box of our SVG to be at least the height of that. And so the bounding box of the SVG should be something like this. And so if this is my page, then I understand that my SVG needs to be a bit higher or a bit longer than the height of my page. And so that's what I'm going to do here. I know I have an SVG. I'm going to add another class. I'm going to call it the curve. Go inside of the styles. And here I have the curve. And inside of the curve, I have an SVG. And I'm going to give the SVG 100 viewport width. However, the height is going to be longer than the height. So I'm going to do 100 viewport height plus 600 pixel. And then the top is going to be minus 300 pixel. And that way, perfectly centered like this, right? So this would be a top 0 with a height of 100 viewport height plus 600 pixel. But instead, it's going to be centered like this. And then I can do left 0, position fixed. And I'm also going to do pointer events none. Okay, so now I have the bounding box of my SVG. I can now create the custom path. However, to create that custom path, I need to know the dimensions of the window. And since I'm in Next.js, I cannot use directly the window inside of the JSX here because the window does not exist server side where Next.js exists at first before being in the browser. And so what I need to do is store the dimensions of the window inside a state. So I'm gonna have here the dimensions, set dimensions is equal to the use state. And here I can initialize a height of 0 and a width of 0. And then I can have a use effect with empty parameters. And I'm just going to import the use state here from React. And inside of that use effect, I can have a function called resize. Inside of it, I set the dimensions with window.innerWidth height, window.innerHeight. And then I can call that function resize. Now I'm going to add an event listener. Every time we resize the window, I also want to resize my state. And here I'm going to clean up after cooking. So I'm just going to do window.remove event listener. I'm going to remove that resize function, something like that. And now we have the dimensions inside of the state. And here we can conditionally return if the dimensions, for example, the width is bigger than 0, then we're going to return the SVG. And then I can pass the dimensions of the window to the SVG. What I can do is deconstruct the dimensions here, and I can do that. And inside of the SVG, I'm going to have access to the width and the height. And now with that information, I can create a custom D attribute. So for that, I could have like an initial, which is going to be equal to a bunch of SVG commands. So the SVG commands, they kind of look something like this, which is absolutely not understandable at first. But if you put your mind into it, you're going to understand it's not that complicated. And the one that I want to use is the quadratic Bezier curve to create a curve here, which is basically going to be that curve that we see on page transition. So let's see, the path, like we said, is going to be what we had like this. This is basically what I'm going to recreate using path commands. So the first thing that I need to do is create a point here. And then I'm going to have a quadratic Bezier curve here, a line, quadratic Bezier, and a line. So first step, I'm going to move my point to 0 and 0. It's going to be that point here. But like I said, I want my point to be here. So I need to do on the X, it's going to be 0, but on the Y, it's going to be 300. So I'm going to do move 0 and 300. And then I'm going to do a Q command, which is that command here, which takes basically 2 pairs of coordinates. And so the first one, x1, y1, is the control point. And the control point is that point in the middle here that dictates the curve. And so I'm going to do Q of the width divided by 2. And then on the y-axis, it's going to be 0. And then the last coordinates, x and y, is going to be the width and 300. Those two values here are basically the end point. It's that point here. So now we have the first curve, and now we're going to do the line. So we're going to do a line to the bottom right corner. So it's going to be the width, and on the y-axis, it's going to be the height minus 300. And that's the point here. We do minus 300 because if we don't, the point is going to be here, but we want it to be here. And then we're going to do the same thing here, but on the other side. So I'm going to do a Q command. I'm going to do width divided by 2. I'm going to do 0, and then the end point is going to be on the X 0 and on the Y height minus 300. And then I'm going to close everything with a line to 0, 300, which is that point here. And then I can give the initial path to the D attribute here. I'm going to save that, see what we have. And this is looking pretty wild. I'm going to inspect this, see what's wrong. So I'm going to scale down the SVG just to see how it looks. Okay, so the curve is working fine at the top, but it's this bottom curve that's really messed up. It's the Y of the control point here shouldn't be 0. Yeah, it should be way more than that. It should be the height plus 300, something like that. Yeah, that's really, really curved. What if I do height here and then height here? Okay, we have something like this. I'm gonna leave it at that for now. Now, if I scale it back to 1, we have something like this, which is not exactly good. It should be way down. Those 2 points here, that line here should be way more. So I'm gonna do plus 300, and now it's probably going to be a flat line here. If I do height only, okay, now we have a negative curve. And if I do 150, okay, so we're going to have a flat line. If I do plus 300, we have a flat line at the bottom. And you know what? I'm going to keep it that way for now. I'm going to start animating everything, And I think it's going to unfold more naturally than if I try to like over engineer it at the beginning. Now, there's also another problem that I see is if I refresh, there's like a flash. And that's because since the dimensions do not exist at first, I'm not returning the SVG until the dimensions get set. And that's why we have a flash. So to solve that problem, we can add another div, which I'm going to call the background. And that background is going to have the same values as the SVG here. So I'm going to do the background is basically the same thing as the SVG, but it's also going to have a background color that's black. Now there's no flash because there's this background at first, and that's basically what I want. But I want to remove it when the SVG is rendered. So I can add some style and I can basically change the opacity, check if the dimensions, the width of the dimensions are bigger than 0. If they are, I want to set the opacity to 0. Else I want the opacity to be 1. And now we don't have the flash problem anymore. If I put the SVG in comments, there's going to be a flash of the background. So the background is there at the beginning and it gets removed, which is like the reverse effect of what's happening for the SVG. And that's perfect because it's solving like that small glitch. And with that, I'm done to animate things now. I want to move things around. And the first thing that I want to do is the sliding. I'm going to do the curving after. I'm going to start with the sliding. I think it's going to be a bit easier. So what I'm going to slide is the SVG. So I'm going to add the motion tag in front of it. And I'm going to take my anim template. I'm going to move it outside of that component so that I can now access it at the bottom here too. And I'm going to have a slide animation. And I'm going to have it initially. I'm going to give a top minus 300 pixels, which is exactly what I have here. So I want my SVG to be there at first. And then I want it to be removed similar to what we have here. Boom, it gets removed and there's a curve and it's curving out. So I'm going to do top 300 and on enter, I'm going to do top minus 100 viewport height. And to make everything look good, I'm going to add a transition, duration 0.75. I'm going to add a bit of delay, maybe 0.3 and some easing. I'm going to go on easings.net, maybe grab the ease in quart, this one here. It's quite a nice one. I'm going to put it as the easing. And here the SVG is going to have the anim template of the slide animation. And now let's try this. Okay, so now it's sliding up, which is pretty good. The only thing that I would like is to have a curve. And so I only need to move my control point lower than those 2 points. And so what I'm going to do here is have this one be plus 600. And so now I have a curve. So that looks good. Now all I have to do is at the same time that I'm sliding everything up, I'm going to reset the curve to a null point. So to animate the curve, I'm going to create here a curve variance with the initial, and initially I'm going to change the D attribute to be the initial path, and then I'm going to do the enter. The D attribute should be a target path. Here it shouldn't be inside of an object, just like this, and then I'm just going to copy paste that, have it as a target path, and I could eventually modify all of those values. And then the path here, I'm just going to put the motion in front of it, and instead of it being hard coded like this, I'm going to do my anim template and I'm going to grab my slide function, not my slide function, I mean the curve function. I'm going to save that. And now nothing should have changed here. Nothing has changed. Great. Now all I have to do is animate those 2 points and the curve. Here what I'm going to do, I'm animating the curve. Let's do 300 just for fun. And you can see that it's doing a flat line. And so to move this is about 300 pixel, I believe. Yeah, so all I have to do is reduce by 300, this point and this point. And I'm also going to reduce this one. And that, yeah, that should work. I'm going to refresh that. And that's working good. Obviously, it's not synced. So I only need to use the transition here, put it for the enter animation of the curve as well. And I'm going to check that. That is super smooth, super clean. I'm going to change page, see what we have. Now, obviously, we don't have the exit animation. So like there's like a bit of a flash, but the enter animation is really, really nice. So let's do the exit animation now. I'm going to take a look at this. On exit, it's at the bottom, and then there's a big curve and it's like sliding up like this. So there's a curve. There's just a curve and it's moving up. So I'm going to do a transition end, and here I'm going to reset the top back at the bottom, and that way the curve is going to be at the bottom and I can animate it back at the top like this. So it's going to be top 100 viewport height, and then on exit I'm going to put back that same value as it had initially, which is the full screen, right? And I'm going to grab the same transition and I'm going to leave it at that for now. Let's see how it looks. I'm going to refresh. That's the enter animation. I'm going to go to home. Okay, so we had a glimpse of the exit animation. It is not working perfectly. So what I forgot to do is add the exit for the curve as well. I'm going to reset back the curve to what it was initially. So I'm going to do exit, grab the D attribute, put it back to what it was initially. I'm gonna try this. And it looks good, but there's a delay and you see the header is disappearing. That's not good. So I'm gonna remove the delay from the exit animation. And I'm gonna grab the transition, put it for the curve as well. And let's try this. Yeah, that looks pretty good. There seems to be a problem with the header. I still see it disappearing and it's not normal. It should be persisting across all of the pages. So if I look at the app.js here, the header, I mistakenly put it inside of the animate presence, which is not good. It shouldn't be inside of that. It should be outside. That's my mistake. And if I save this, let's see the page transition, and whew, that makes so much more sense. The header stays and that looks just really, really good. And now there's one last element inside of the Denis Snellenberg website that I really like is if I click on the work page, there's the work index that's showing. That's kind of indicating the user where he's going. That is just so nice. And it's actually not that complicated to do that in Next.js. One thing I can do here is import the use router hook from Next router. And then I can create a router object, which is going to be equal to the use router hook. And then I could have a paragraph here with the router.route. And here, as you can see, it's right there, the backslash. If I go on the about, you can see that it's about. If I go on the contact, you can see that it's the contact page. Now, obviously, I don't want it to be exactly the path name, the name of what's inside of the URL. So what I can do is I'm going to create like a dictionary or like a nenum kind of. So I'm going to have the routes, which are going to be equal to, I know the home is backslash, but I want it to be called home. And then I know the about page is that, and I want it to be called about. Same thing for contact. And with that, I can use the routes of the router.route. And now, as you can see, it's contact. If I go on the about page, it's about, and if I go in home, it's the home, which is exactly what I want. And then I can just add a route class name. Going inside of the styling, I'm gonna have my route. And now to position this, I'm gonna do position absolute, like a top 40%, left 50% with a transform translate X. And that's like a little trick to center it perfectly on the X axis. You can do that. And now you can see it's right here. And then I'm gonna do font size 46 pixels, looking pretty good. And I'm gonna do actually a color white and a Zen index 3. So it's on top of the SVG. And now I have the about page, the contact page, and home. And now all I need to do is animate the text here. So not too complicated. I'm gonna have a text variance, and let's see. Initially, I kind of like it how it is right now, so I'm gonna leave it with an opacity of 1. It's kind of nice how it is like appearing right at the start. And then on enter, I want to animate it with the curve, right? So I'm gonna have the enter animation. I'm gonna put the opacity to 0, and I'm gonna translate it by like -100 on the y-axis. And so I'm just gonna add a motion tag in front of the paragraph, motion tag here, and then I can use my anim template, specify the text, and I can save that. Let's see what we have. Okay, it's a bit glitched. Okay, I believe the Y here is conflicting with the transform that's right there. So instead of playing with the transform, I'm gonna play with the top value, and I believe that should remove the glitch. And then we see the text like just yeeting at the top. I'm gonna add some delay. Same thing as the slide here. I'm gonna take the same transition, add it to the enter animation. I'm gonna save this, and this makes a lot of sense. Looking pretty cool. So that's pretty good for the enter animation. Now I'm gonna take a look at the exit. I'm gonna see what he has. Okay, on exit, it's at the bottom, invisible, and then it's appearing. Okay, so I'm gonna do exit. I'm gonna set the opacity back to 1, and I'm gonna set the top to 40%, which is like a nice position, the same as I did in CSS. And I'm gonna take the same transition here, and let's try this. So that's the enter. Let's see the exit now. Okay, so it's coming from the top because of top -100. So I'm gonna do transition end, and I'm gonna put the top a bit lower than this, so maybe 47.5%. I'm gonna go to home. Oh, I see it. It's working good. It's just not the right motion design, so it's not the right easing. I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna grab maybe something that goes fast and then slow, like this one here. I'm gonna grab that. Let's try this. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. It's looking pretty good. I think I want to change the duration, make it a bit faster, and I'm going to add some delay as well. Oh yeah, that's looking really nice. So there you go. I think that's it. We have it. That's the page transition of the Denis Snellenberg's website. And that officially wraps this video. I hope you learned something. Honestly, when people debate with me for GSAP when using Next.js, like GSAP versus Framer Motion, just show them how easily it is to create page transitions using Framer Motion. It's a big plus over GSAP. All right, if you try to create page transitions using GSAP, you're gonna have to create like a super big hack. But with Framer Motion, you have something out of the box like this. So yeah, if you like the video, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.